My family loves classical music, and it's the first time I hear it in here, and it's lovely. Oh.
We've just been stopped by a definition of the atmosphere in American high schools as easy, lazy, and noisy. Now, what honestly do you mean by that? I don't think that's quite fair.
Well, I think that the intellectual standard is very low, and that any person with any moderate intelligence in an American school can get by with doing very little work.
Well, I disagree. No, I disagree completely, because, I mean, the aims of American education are completely different. I mean, it's a kind of average education, and we can't expect more than what we have seen in the...
Yes, but suppose there is a boy whose standards are much more than average, whose intellect is much more than average. What does he gain by going to a school where the education is average, where he can't put up his thoughts or do anything?
Well, exactly, that's democracy. I mean, we can't help it. That's the democratic attitude which exists in American schools.
All right, then, you take that for granted, but do you agree with it? We agree that it's a fact that it's democratic education. Do you think it's right that it should be democratic education?
Well, I do agree, because, I mean...
Americans are far coming up. Do you think that with this average education it's going to reach anywhere? I don't think.
Actually, Nalini, I had attended a school where they did cater considerably for the more than average girl. They had what they call a seminar class. It was more or less on the, based on the, I think, the German system of seminar classes, where they did certainly do a very good job in giving a deeper education. It was not so much broader as deeper to the pupils who did show definite problems. It was recognized. It was, I mean, they did, for instance, this English seminar, which had put much more stress on literature, both European and American.
Now, this is the exception rather than the rule, though. In America, democratic education, I think, is okay for an isolationist country, where the sole aims of the country are commercial and economic. But when a country is going to set out on world domination, or at least to protect democratic ideals against communism, they've got to be the equal of the Russians in chucking Sputniks around and in scientific research and that sort of thing. But now, this average education is often a mediocre education.
Well, John, I think that this democratic attitude is the only attitude which made United States survive as a nation today. And that's the only way it can really survive. Because just imagine a country which consists of so many different other nations with different traditions, different religions, different languages. I mean, how is it possible it came to be a one unit, I mean, so closely tied? It wouldn't be able to survive if it wasn't for this similarity and this one aim in citizenship training.
How do they do it in India? How do they do it in India?
In what way?
You have national unity in India just as much as unity in America.
And we don't go in front of the flag daily and pledge allegiance.
But I think the women...
Do you know, in my school that I've attended, they pledge allegiance to the flag. Half of them fidgeting about, one putting his hand into his pocket and then putting his hand here and pledging allegiance.
Well, exactly, that's the aim of education.
But listen, Gus, don't you think that American schools are inclined to taking onto themselves too much of the education of their pupils? After all, education needn't necessarily be something that begins and ends in the school, and that is what's happening in America. I've, for instance, found out that whereas they do, we don't in our schools get so much of training in music and art and other things which I think are very essential, but we do get that outside the school. This thing of being loyal to your country and being a good citizen needn't be necessarily instilled only in your school.
Well, exactly, that's the point. I mean, we are misinterpreting the aims and the ideals of American education. I mean, the point is not only the acquisition of knowledge, but on the whole of, I mean, creating personalities and characters.
To turn out conform, democratic, capitalist, mediocre pupils.
That's right.
I mean, why not?
And there's a
democratic, free enterprise, how to behave with other people's relations with other people. That's the aim of American
this pledge of allegiance that they do daily. We in India are a nation something like America, where we find different communities of people who are not so well developed as in America. You have 840 dialects, all coming from different small villages where there is no sort of education. We don't pledge allegiance to the flag. We do it on our Independence Day, on our Republic Day. But even then we have, we have unity in our country, which hasn't yet broken up, even though we don't pledge allegiance to the flag.
I think one
Well, that's another way of keeping the unity. That's another way they do it here in the United States.
Well, do you know, one boy actually Heil Hitlered the flag every morning. He used to, you know, where they say, one nation indivisible with liberty and justice for all. And then this boy went Heil Hitler to the flag. It's a mockery, and people react against it.
Well, I mean, that's an exception in the
It isn't. No, I didn't find it an exception.
How do you know
In the
but
class
really,
that I
I think
attended.
you shouldn't overestimate the value of this flag business. I mean, that is one aspect of it. Now, one can say that there is... I have found that another aspect which Well, actually, I must admit that we have visited only one school so far,
yes,
and we shouldn't start generalizing. But I think what American education is really might miss in future is that they might give, in the first place, a good factual education. They might turn out good citizens with a good all-round education, but they fail to educate and cater for the really high intellectual, this person who is not going to begin and end his education in school, but who must be prompted to search further and to get a deeper intellectual education.
And yet, America is our one bastion for freedom against Russia. And America is trying to put an average, mediocre education against Russia's high specialized. That's why America is falling behind in the missile race.
Do you really believe that, I mean, that's what, from what you said, I think that you mean that the United States can keep its prestige and its position as a world power only by changing its educational program or something of that sort. Well, that's, do you really believe that America can gain that by trying to surpass Russia in the scientific fields and in the acquisition of knowledge? I don't think that's true.
That's what they want. That's what the Americans want. They want to surpass Russia in the missile field or in the space field, as it. That's what they want.
That's not true. The aim of American education is to make good citizenships so that they can keep this unity which consists of so many different people and nations.
But at the same time, they want this too.
Yes, they've got two alternatives.
You've got to raise the standard of education.
Either an isolationist country with this average education, or a progressive, world-protecting country, sort of supporting the West as it is doing at the moment as a prop to the West,
Now,
with an
listen here,
advanced
Johnny.
education.
I don't think that is quite fair. After all, don't you think education is also a weapon against communism?
How do you go about it, though? You see, the best weapon I would say against communism would be education for truth. A lot of these people who are brought up in these problems of democracy classes and world problems classes are turned out either socialists or anti-democrats because they react against it. Now, if they're given all the different alternatives freely, instead of being told that communism is a big bad bogey and communism is not half as good as capitalism,
well,
then I think they might have a greater approach to truth.
That the best way that we can overcome communism is that not only every American, but every individual must realize that man is in a position, as he's in a position to destroy himself, he's also in a position to preserve peace. And that's one of the aims of American education.
To preserve peace?
Exactly.
But surely at the present rate of development, Russia is going to be so specialized that in advanced research and in space research, they're going to be so far ahead of America that they will dominate America.
And Americans are realizing that now.
Yes.
And if they want to go anywhere, they've got to raise the standard.
And, well, then, do you really believe that the Americans are far backward than the Russians are?
Yes.
And
in the space field, yes.
And do you think that they will never be able to overcome them and surpass them?
But do you think that it is really so much more important for America to win this, well, shall we say, communist, capitalist struggle through specialization and through the space?
I don't.
Conquering space, rather than giving what they consider a good all-round education.
Well, that's just one facet of this race between communism and capitalism. And you know how much trouble, what hullabaloo there was in America when Russia got the first Sputnik up. It's an aim that they've set for themselves, and they haven't lived up to it. Now, this is causing radical rethinking in education. I think that the pre-Sputnik and post-Sputnik ages will be sort of a landmark in American education. They're already bringing in more seminars. Doesn't this suggest that they're questioning the basic idea that everyone should get the same average education?
Yes, but I think one should commend the fact that their present educational system is fairly flexible. I mean, they are making an effort, and I think for that, at least, we must give them their due.
Well, I think we're going out of the subject. I mean, we were criticizing the American educational system, and we were talking about the educational system. I mean, the thing I've tried to get out of this thing is that we haven't really understood what are the aims of American education. That's what we misinterpret them and misunderstand them. That's the great problem.
Well, Johnny, excuse me, you come from a democratic country. How does your school system differ from ours? Maybe we could help Gus's point if we'd understand that.
Well, instead of giving everyone an average education, at the age of 11, people are subdivided by a system which I confess is inefficient, but which is being improved, into 25% going into a very specialized high school system where the emphasis is on academic education. 25% go into technological education where if their mind shows a bend towards machinery and bricks and things like that. and the rest get a general, what we would call a high school education. Now, this is education in accordance with abilities. It doesn't mean that the most intelligent person gets a better education. It means that the most intelligent person gets an education more suited to his abilities.
And you mean that that is done when one is 11 years old? Well, the same thing is exactly done in the United States, but when someone is 17 or 18 years old, that's exactly the difference in the main
Yes,
point.
and haven't they left it too late? They start learning their languages at the age of 15, and how can one get all the vocabulary of a language at the age of 15? The mind is at its most retentive at the ages of 12, 13, and 14. That's when I learnt all my vocabulary.
Well, I mean, why do you stress on vocabulary and so on? When one is 17 or 18, he's got more abilities to explore his attitudes and talents.
Not with the elective subjects that they have here, not with the vast choice that they're given here.
Well, exactly. Then we're coming to the other point of American education, which is independence and freedom. They want to make each individual feel responsible and self-respect and self-control. That's exactly the democratic attitude of American education.
This is where we come back to lazy, because as Nalini was telling us, there's a choice between physics and opera.
Between chemistry and band.
Exactly. You must be in a position to choose what you want. That's democracy. That's democracy.
Yes, but listen here, Gus, what I was saying in the first place, I think that these schools are taking too much on themselves. I don't think it is right that they should learn opera and band in school. I think it is perfectly right that they should have the chance of learning that. As people do you feel that you haven't had a chance to learn anything about opera?
Of course not. I certainly didn't learn it at school.
Well, exactly. That's if you want to learn chemistry in here in the high schools in the United States, you can just as well learn it. If you want to go to a college, you can just as well go to a college.
But why must one learn things like opera? Do you know, I'm staying with a boy now who's done 2 years sewing. And he tells me quite frankly that it's done him no good at all.
Well, exactly. That's why. That's
why
a
did
good
you
thing
do that,
about it.
Johnny?
Everything is needed in this life, and even sewing. Sometimes you'll need it.
Yes, but I think the American educational system shows us the very lack of, what shall one call it, not discipline, sense of values. I mean, do you think that sewing is going to be more important to him than... I saw, for instance, in the other school, a beautiful homemaking center, where they do learn very commendable work. But I'm sure that by the time those girls have graduated, they won't know anything more about cooking and sewing than I do, having learnt it in my home.
Well, what do you mean by education? Maybe we're talking about different things. Nalini, what do you mean by education? Talk about, what's the goal of a high school education, from your point of view?
Well, in my country, the goal of a high school education, or even education in its sense, is to bring up the people, to help our country, to bring it up. Because we are now so underdeveloped, we need educated people to bring it up. So that's one of our aims, to bring up our students so that they can help our country, they can bring it up to what it was when.
I disagree. I think that the aim of every education is not only to give knowledge and so on, but not only to develop someone mentally, but also physically and morally. And by making the individual, by helping him in the attempt of the individual to become a free human being. And I think that is accomplished in the American education more than any other.
Okay, well, let's just examine these rounded characters that the American education system produces. Do you know, I haven't yet met one American student, and I've met some very advanced ones who are right at the top of the school, who has heard of Goethe, or Racine, or Corneille, or knows anything about the Greek tragedies. Well, there's a complete lack of culture and philosophical knowledge.
You've only been here for 15 days and you can't criticize them.
Johnny,
in that way.
That is generalizing. I have in my school met many of those people who know about it considerably more than I do.
And a boy in my school, in the honors class, said, Iran is one of the 49 states. When a delegate from Iran says she comes from Iran, that boy says, is Iran one of the 49 states, one of the 49 United States?
Well, how do you say that? How do you think that he didn't say it as a joke or something?
He didn't.
Well then, do you mean that all the kids in your school know something about know everything about world geography and so on?
It's not world geography.
Aren't there any exceptions?
They know all the 14 states and the 6 union territories of my country.
Of India, yes.
He's an honest boy. Do you think he should not know the 49 his own states?
Gosh, Nalini, come back to your point that your idea of education is to help people help their country. Is that what Indian education is doing now?
Well, in my point of view, I think it is.
I've heard a little bit about overeducated Indians. Is there anything to that? I'm honestly asking for information here, Nalini.
Well, we had them during the time of the British, where they just wanted to use us as clerks and gave them the Indian Civil Service, as it was called then, when they passed out from the Oxford and Cambridge universities. And Johnny once asked me, what did you say just some time back?
I can't remember.
Well, he's trying to put it out, so I know.
This is a British Empire which has admittedly passed. I mean, you won't find that out during the colonies.
No, now we don't find it. Now we don't find any overeducated people who do not find enough work. Though of course there is unemployment problem. We do find MAs and BAs still as bus conductors. It's not because they are not given the opportunities. It's because they can't find work. We don't have enough work to give them.
Isn't that a bit of a problem in the United States as well, that they find that they have a rather bigger supply than a demand for educated people right now?
Well, certainly not in science.
No, but in other fields.
But I think that mass education, I mean education approachable by all people, would be the only way that really India could rise its living standards and could really survive as a free nation. Don't you think so?
It might, but mass education I don't think is going to bring up an average standard of education in India. It need not be. Because see, we have increased our education. We have now the boys and girls between 6 and 18, there are 49%, and that has increased a
Just
lot.
a minute, 49% of the boys between and girls between 6 and 18 are in school.
Yes.
How much illiteracy?
Less than half.
How much illiteracy is there?
I think.
Pretty high.
Yes, it's
Half,
very high.
50%?
More than that.
More than 50%, and yet you've got a democracy.
Yes.
In which everyone votes.
Everyone, all girls and boys above 21.
So you have an illiterate, well, a semi-illiterate electorate for a democratic state.
It's not democracy then.
That's not democratic at all.
It's not democracy,
Yes,
because how can an illiterate person vote? I mean, that's not a democratic state.
No, I can't understand how you can...
But if he knows whom he is going to vote for, why can't he?
But how can he judge? Has
How
he
can
got
he
to judge
decide?
him?
Yes.
But we have each village has its own voting this thing, and I'm sure a person is going to know
But listen,
whom he
this
wants
is
to
getting
vote
a
for
bit
when
off
it's going
the
to be
point.
representatives of their own village or their own community.
India is in a point of transition, and so is America. But I think the problem is basically different, and we should stick to American education. I think what America is facing today is actually Mrs. Waller's favorite expression of having to choose sometimes between, what do you call it, well-adjusted blockheads or maladjusted eggheads. And I think that America basically is finding herself in a position where she is this feeling of maladjusted eggheads rather expressed as an opinion that the idea that to be intellectual means to be, and highly educated, means to be rather less adept at other things.
Well, who's going to govern this country then? Who's going to govern it?
Since you brought this point up, let me get an answer from you. What would you rather be, a well-adjusted blockhead or a maladjusted egghead?
I don't think you've got to be either.
I don't think.
the middle way is the best.
I think that is such a wrong idea.
Yes.
That should be an alternative. I mean, why should a person who is intellectually well-trained and more intelligent... Come on, Gus, you defend this system. Why do you think to be intellectual, highly developed, should make you less of a good citizen?
Well, I don't know, really. That's a bit Greek to me, to tell the truth, but...
It's the same to me, too.
I should say that I think the middle way is the best way off. I mean, the middle way between the two.
Well, that's what I think we have, but I deplore the lack of culture in America. The fact that people just are not well-rounded. This idea of giving people lots of physical education, lots of vocational training and lots of academic training
exactly,
to produce
Johnny.
a well-rounded, civilized, democratic personality who can vote well. I think a lot of those things which you try to teach in the schools in America
Are not schoolwork.
are acquired outside school, like sewing. If you want to learn sewing, learn it outside. It's a question of alternatives. It's better to do 2 years physics at school and learn your sewing at home if you want to, than to do 2 years sewing at school instead of physics.
But exactly, that's what we say. That we said that the aim of American education is not to learn sewing or to learn physics or chemistry. The main aim is to make good citizens. That's what we can't understand. That's why the foreigners, I don't know how we take things so badly.
Basically, you think that this aim of turning out good citizens is a good one, and you think it's a bad one.
Of turning out
Turning out good citizens through your education.
Well, do you that's what I'm questioning, the fact that you do not turn out
Well,
good
that's
citizens.
an ideal. Maybe it has not been reached in practice, But that's an ideal, and when it's reached, then it will stop to be an ideal, but for the time being, it's an ideal.
Its aim is to be a good citizen, isn't it?
Exactly.
At the same time, it wants to lead in the space field.
But listen, don't you think there are many people in America who can get a very good education apart from citizenship? In spite of this, I have attended a school. Now, I must again stress the point that we have been in only one school and can't really form such hard and fast opinions. We'll probably change them considerably. But I still think that in the one school where I attended, anybody who did not get a good all-round education, who did not emerge from that school as a formed person, well, at the age of 17, had only himself to blame, either because he was lazy or because he was less intelligent. But I do think that...
How do the rest of you react to that? Marita's point, if I understand it, is that anyone can get as much education as he really wants.
No, I don't think so.
It's true in the United States. Yeah. Everyone is independent and free to choose what he wants to do. If he wants to go to a college, he can just as well do it. He's got all the chances and opportunities to do it.
He cannot. Most families, I've noticed, Mrs. Waller, can't afford to go to college. I've heard so many students saying they just can't afford to go to college because I think the government should give, at least the government or the community should give more scholarships.
Well,
because college education compared to school education is so much more expensive.
I'll tell you something. How does it happen then that out from the 10 million, I think, graduates from high schools, about 2 million go to colleges?
You forget what difference there is in the standard of colleges. I mean, to go in a college in America is not the same as going to a college, for instance, in France and in England. And I think with the amount of money that the federal government is spending on defense, they could have done a bit more to make the, one of the girls mentioned to me that it would cost her father something over $3,000 to keep her at a college. And
well, you can't. The federal government cannot aid the schools because it's a decentralized kind of education.
In the whole of the United States, only 15% of the boys and girls go to college after mass education and in school.
Do you know how that compares to other countries?
In England, it's 5%. But you've got to remember this, that somebody who's graduated from high school in England has done the equivalent of 2 years American university, not college, university work.
There's one thing that confuses me just a little bit here. How does it happen that American universities do, I believe, would you agree, do take their place with the best universities in the world?
Of course they do.
Well, some of them, the standard differs.
Well, there's so many
No, we'll talk about the best now. Well, why is
Harvard,
it that?
MIT,
why is it? Where is time being lost? If the end product from the American school higher education is as good as from any other country.
I don't think it is. I don't think it can be. This is going to be very controversial. I'm going to get into trouble for saying this, but I don't think it is.
Well,
let's get back to the main problem.
Scientists and physics come out of American universities, an educated man, which can equally come out of Cambridge or Oxford or any other European university.
What sort of a course do they have? How long is it?
Well, I mean...
Depends on what degree you're working for.
Yes,
but the thing that is still confusing me is that last year 40,000 graduate students from other countries wanted to come here to go on with their education.
Because they can't go to England because they're not allowed in. They're not allowed into France because we can't afford to give so many scholarships as you do. You're very generous, agreed. You're the most generous country in the world for scholarships, and I think all the underdeveloped countries will appreciate it very much. But I still think that the fact that you've got more money than we have does not mean that you've got a better educational system. I think, like Marita, that you're wasting a lot of money, which could be put to better purposes in a different educational system. We all agree that mass education is a good thing, and that education to produce good citizens is a good thing. But I still disagree about this idea of the average pupil. Now, I'm generalizing about one school I've seen, but in each class I went to, there were perhaps 2 or 3 really intelligent pupils who were a long way ahead of the rest. Now, these pupils didn't have to do any work, or very little work, because the fact that they were innately more intelligent meant that they would come out top. Now, if you bring all these little groups of 3 all together in one class, the competition and the standard will be so high.
Well, exactly, that's democracy, Johnny. That's what it has to be.
Well, we have a democratic educational system in which this is accomplished.
Now, listen, guys, do you think they should sacrifice that to democracy?
They should, because, first of all, I mean, the talented has an opportunity, has a chance.
No.
All it is, she does. I mean,
well, let me ask you this one final question. You come from a country where what % of the people are in high school?
Gosh, I don't have the facts.
Well, you said it's something less than half in India, probably less than that in South Africa. I don't know what the Greek average is.
Well, I should say that I know the percentage of illiteracy, which is about 20% increase.
My question to you is, if your schools tomorrow were educating everybody of high school age, what problems would your schools have that they don't have now?
Well, in South Africa, the chief problem is that we are giving a free compulsory education to everybody between 6 and 16 of European descent, and we're also giving a free education, not compulsory, to Africans, for the simple reason that the Africans, and I must mention the fact that in the Transvaal there are more Africans than Europeans sitting on the school banks, in Natal more Indians than Africans.
But in your own school, I'd love to hear you and Nalini answer this. In your own school, suppose tomorrow everybody in India of high school age is in school. How would this change your school? In any way at all?
Well, it would. It would complicate it extremely much. It would probably happen, well, more or less the same that is happening here.
It might complicate matters in India too, but I don't think it's going to bring down the standard of education. I don't see why it should bring down the standard of education. Because if we are going to bring these people up, say the girls and boys who are just entering school, we bring them on to the same standard. And if we are getting them onto the same standard, we're keeping the same standard, and we might be able to increase it later. But I don't see why it should come down.
Well, this is a fundamental problem in education. I hope we can have another session to talk about this. If you're educating everybody, slow learners, average, and gifted, all together, does it do anything to bring the standards down? I think we can end on that question to ourselves, and we'll have another session on education to try to answer it. Until next week, then. But you certainly have.